Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana M.A. and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing forth the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
We talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop an episode every Tuesday.
So back in episode 162, we started the discussion on how delegation can allow you to focus on the art while having support for your art business. On today's episode, we're actually going to dive a little bit deeper into this topic, and we're going to discuss the different types of team members you may consider working with, tips for training them, and some of the pros and cons of hiring in person versus virtual. So we're going to dive straight into the different types of team members. In the last episode, we talked a little bit more general level of the types of folks you might work with, but this one's more not just one-off. This is folks that you may want to work with, at least every once in a while. So some of the team members that you can think about for your art business, and to help you manage different aspects of your practice is going to be, well, you're going to have some in-person ones, you're going to have some virtual ones, and depending what kind of assistant you work with is how you can delegate a little bit more and free up more time for your creative tasks. So first one that comes to mind is going to be a studio assistant. So a studio assistant is in person. They handle day-to-day tasks like managing studio visitors. Say you're out of town, they come in and they're helping out. Or you have a big busy event, and while you're talking to potential buyers and collectors, they're there helping, with the transactions, for example. They can help you organize your materials. They can handle some of your inventory. If you have a large body of work and you have all these pieces that need to be wired, need to be framed, like they can help you with you need to varnish a lot of pieces. Like this is someone that can come in and help you with some of your day-to-day tasks, right? That you have to do anyways. On the other hand, mural/painting assistants, they're also in person, but they provide on-site support for mural and or painting projects. They assist with different parts of the logistics of it. So maybe it's like helping to tape before you paint, doing some fills, setting down the drop cloths. Like there's a lot of different things that they can help you with. They can help capture social media content while you're in the middle of painting and things like that. A lot of times I think of the mural/painting assistants as they can make a project, go a lot faster because you can literally divide and conquer and say, I'll do the outlines, you do the fills. Like, yeah, they can definitely be very helpful.
Yeah, and I think that's really when, with assistance, the great mindset to have around it is kind of that it's not obviously replacing what you're doing as an artist, but it's assisting, right? It's saying, okay, you have developed a system or you need an extra set of hands and helping you be more efficient in the process or help do those things that you don't have time to do because you're making your own artwork. And especially when it comes to things virtually, that is really common for a lot of business owners, but especially artists. So in addition to a studio assistant or a mural painting assistant, you can also think about virtual assistants. So people that handle those administrative tasks such as social media or video editing, website updates, customer service emails, researching client opportunities, all of the in front of the computer screen stuff. That I know for many artists can be a big pain point for, they just want to make artwork, they want to be in the studio, but you have to promote it on social media. You need to be sending out newsletters. You need to update your website with the new paintings that you just made. That's something that would be perfect work for a virtual assistant. And another thing that I think many people forget to think about is really looking at specialized contractors. So someone that is very talented at a niche specific thing, such as photography or framing, maybe accounting, legal support, marketing, really to fill in those gaps for the things that you want to make sure are absolutely done correctly. When it comes to accounting, especially, you want to make sure, okay, that is a system that gets set up by a professional that you know is being done correctly, or photographing your work, because once you sell a painting, 3, 4, 5 years later, I guarantee you there's going to be some point where you're like, man, I really wish I had a better picture of this painting. And so
Mhm.
that's investing back into your business with hiring a contract worker. But with any of these types of assistants, whether contract worker, virtual assistant, studio assistant, or painting assistant, the biggest thing that is so, so important and can often be the barrier for why many people don't start growing a team is training, because training is ultimately the most important thing. This is what allows your team members to effectively understand your vision for your business, the work that they are doing, and making sure that they represent you and your brand, your company, your creative voice correctly. So with training, there's many elements to it. There's many rabbit holes that you can go down in terms of podcasts or videos and trainings yourself on how to train team members. But ultimately, it starts with really clear instructions, outlining the specific task that you want them to do, having clear expectations on when and how to do it to really avoid that confusion. And one thing that I have found has been most helpful is providing and creating those training resources for your assistant. So developing guides or videos that help train your team, both for this first expansion of your team, if it's your first time hiring someone, that will essentially train all future team members as well, too. So I personally love doing walkthrough trainings. And so this is essentially for, let's say if you're hiring someone as a virtual assistant, you are doing a recording of your entire screen and walking them through the process from beginning to end. Let's say, for example, if they're editing a video, you're saying, okay, if I were the person sitting down to do this task, this is my entire process. So that way it's basically like they're looking over your shoulder. You verbalize to them what you're doing, decisions that you're making, maybe examples of different situations that you naturally have thought about in your head, because they don't know what they don't know, right? And the more information you can give them, one, the better chance they have of getting it right or close to correct the first time they do a task. But also, it just makes sure that they are getting to know you better and better. So it can be really helpful to get them inside of your mind. Plus, then you ultimately did the task. You edited the video, so it's not just wasted time, so to speak, of providing training, but you also did the task itself. And then maybe they can do it the next time.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of times it works with versus regardless of whether it's virtual or in person, it works for both, you know. So if your studio assistant in person can help you with a video that you already recorded a training for, all they have to do is watch it. You just give them the link, you know. Or they watch it, you know, on your laptop or whatever. So it's definitely helpful. Now, I will say, obviously, when it comes to contractors, you're not necessarily going to train them, but it's good to kind of think
Right.
about definitely the part about clear instructions to be like, look, it's my business and I need that frame to be XYZ, or I need this thing to be set up XYZ, and just have that up front so that they know how they can support you better because, you know, nobody reads minds. So there's that.
As
Speaking
nice
of
as that
reading
would be,
minds,
that would be great.
maybe that could be very
Sometimes,
cute.
sometimes.
Oh, so you could have paid me more to file your taxes every year. You shouldn't have heard that thought. Um, no, but seriously, speaking of, you know, not being able to mind read, I feel like another thing that is crucial, you know, if you're considering hiring or bringing someone on, again, whether it's every once in a while or a little bit more steady, you need to do regular check-ins. Like there's no way around it. I feel like doing regular check-ins to provide feedback, to be able to answer questions, to ensure basically everyone is on the same page. How often you meet is completely up to you and the person that you're working with. To give an example with my VA, she is overseas and we do it about once a week. We do a quick life check-in, you know, what have you been up to this week? Have you done anything fun this weekend? You know, we take a few minutes for that. And then We go into updates for any current outstanding tasks or upcoming ones. And then I love to do that also for any live training for upcoming projects. So sometimes I will do a video, but either the video is not sufficient and I need to add additional information, or sometimes I can just demo it while we're in our meeting. I just share my screen, kind of go through the process, and that's it. That's all we need. Um, no video recording needed sometimes, depending on how complex the task is. But also, it helps if there's a question. Sometimes, depending what we're working on, it can be a little bit hard to articulate. And I feel like one of the things, and I think we talked about it last episode too, on 162, is when you're hiring somebody else to help you out, some of it is to help you with things that you're already good at and that they're good at as well. And sometimes you're going to be hiring someone that is good at something you're not. And that's where a lot of times the contractors come in and things like that. So by having your regular checking, you can kind of see where you're at. And sometimes it's less about, hey, can you do it the way I want you to? And more about like, hey, this is actually hard for me to articulate because it's outside of my, area of expertise. Can you help me here? And a lot of times having that live communication is going to help you through that. Which actually leads me to having open communication. So I feel it's super duper important if you want people to continue to help you out and not just disappear after helping you out once. You need to have an environment where people feel welcome and comfortable asking you questions, offering suggestions. Um, Being friendly yet assertive, I feel like is a good approach. I mean, you're still quote unquote the boss. Actually, sometimes you are the boss in a more official manner and not just ad hoc every once in a while. But essentially, it's like being empathetic and remembering, like, whatever would have taken you a certain amount of time, chances are it's going to take them a little bit longer, especially if it's something new for them. And being empathetic but firm, right? Like if the expectation is this would take me 2 days, it might take them three. Okay, that's great. That's what we talked to when we met, and that open communication. And if they're like, hey, it's 3.5 days and I'm still stuck, they can come to you and say, hey, I'm having issues, and not have to be like, feeling awkward about it. Or maybe you're the one that needs to have the conversation of, hey, like, hey, this was supposed to take 3 days, it's been a week. Again, it's kind of like assertive but still friendly, not like how dare you. Like, which I feel like, when you're paying somebody else for the first time, it can feel that way a little bit, but it's just kind of like, towing that line. And again, by having that open communication, then if there's any challenges from either side, then it's a little bit easier to resolve.
Yeah,
Which,
and I think
which, which, which.
that's really important too, is like that mindset shift that can happen
Mm-hmm.
whenever you're thinking about expanding a team. As many of us have had an employer of some sort at some time in our lives, we're used to being the one that's given instruction. And so that is a
Mm-hmm.
very big mindset shift as stepping into the role of a business owner. If you're thinking about hiring someone in your team, is that, oh, wait, what kind of boss do I want to be? What kind of
Oh yeah.
employer do I want to be in terms of communication style or, yeah, having a clear expectation? And it's those things that even when you find that you're like critical of a prior boss to be like, how could they even think about doing this? And then when you're put in those shoes, it's you find yourself doing or maybe accidentally doing other things. So it's definitely something to think about of, okay, standing in your role as the employer, not the employee. The big mindset shift.
Exactly. And always remembering that you were the employee, that you're both as a business owner, you're
Mm-hmm.
both the boss and the employee. So when you're having somebody help you out, it's like can't just be boss and just be like, "Oh, you did this and you're out of here." Like be a little more empathetic essentially. Um that brings us to in-person versus virtual assistants, which is definitely something we need to talk about. Um, it's one of those things where it can impact how you manage your team and delegate tasks depending what you lean towards. For some folks, in person is the easiest first way to go. And that's what I did at least. And I think most everybody does. Like if you have a photographer on site, that's in person, right? But then if you need help with building your website. I know a lot of artists will delegate to someone that's online and not even necessarily in their own state or country. So there's going to be like different ways that you work with them. That comes to mind with in person. of course, is that they can help you with on-hands help. Like, hey, this is a giant painting. Can you grab that side and open the door while I grab this side? There's that logistical stuff they can help with. They can adapt quickly to studio specific needs. Like, hey, it looks like those paintings are leaning a little bit. Can you take care of that while I do this other thing? Um, but with that, they may require a little bit more management and coordination, especially like managing your schedules. Like, what time can you be there? Okay, how long does it take you to get to the studio? Like, is there going to be traffic on the way? So there's a little bit more logistics that can take place with that. And then it's not a bad thing, but it's something important to be mindful about. When you have several assistants in person at the same time, be mindful of potentially clashing personalities. We've all met the
Mhm.
folks that are like want to take charge, which is wonderful and beautiful, and we love you guys. Um, and then you'll have the ones that are a little bit more timid, that are like, I just want to do my thing, nobody talk to me, and we love them too, of course. But sometimes if you have too many of one kind or the other, there can be a little bit of a clash of personality. So just keep your eye out, and it just means that you, as the employer, the boss person in this situation, the next time you're having them come out, then you might have a different combination of people to come and help you out. So that's just something to keep an eye out for. I mean, I've never had any of my assistants fight each other. Like, we're good, everybody's friends. But sometimes you can tell there's a little bit of like, oh, but I thought I was going to do this task, but this person already took it. But how do we handle that? So just something to keep an eye out for if you have several people on site. And then when it comes to virtual assistants, they can provide flexibility and they can handle administrative tasks from everywhere. But just like Jackie mentioned, they may need a little bit more clearer communication and sometimes even additional tools to stay aligned with your goals, which actually there's something that we forgot to mention with video trainings. Sometimes guys, just go on YouTube. Sometimes that training that you need that goes into the full nitty-gritty detail, somebody already did it, and all you have to do is copy paste the link, and it's chef's kiss. It's just wonderful.
Very true. Don't try to reinvent the wheel if you don't have to.
That's true.
And yeah, but with all these things too, I'm sure a lot of people are thinking, okay, well, what's right for me? An in-person assistant, a virtual assistant? Maybe you're still on the fence of, do I even need an assistant at all? But a big factor for many people is, of course, the cost consideration. So virtual assistants can often be more affordable, especially if you're hiring from a region where there's lower living costs. Obviously, for them, they may also have more flexible hours. If it's virtual, you just say, I need this task by a certain time and day, and they can typically, depending on what your guys' agreement is, do the work in between maybe another day job that they have or additional virtual assistant tasks they have versus an in-person assistant. If they're not available between 2 and 5 p.m. on Tuesday and you need them in the studio, then it's not going to work. So, really, the cost considerations of paying in person versus virtual, but also, as with that example, the types of tasks can also determine who you hire. So, if you have the physical presence that is needed, organizing the studio, putting wire on paintings, transporting things, a virtual assistant obviously cannot do that. So, really figuring out and asking yourself, okay, realistically, one, what would my budget be for hiring on a team member? But also, what are truly the things that I want help with or could delegate? Because that may steer you in the right direction of the type of assistant that you should be investing in.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to mix and match. Like, I've had in person and virtual at the same time, studio and painting at the same time, and virtual at the same time. So it's like it just depends on your needs. And I will say, like, I'll throw this out there. I've met so many people that are like, I'd love to have somebody help me out, but I can't afford it. And then I will throw a random number at them of like, how about if this person charged you, I'm gonna make this up, guys. I'm gonna make this up. $5 an hour, and their jaw drops and goes, "Oh, I could afford that." And it's like, yeah, you can. Like, it just depends, what you're looking to do. In person, $5 an hour in US of A, it's not gonna happen as far as I'm aware. Maybe somebody's kid is helping you out, right? But generally no. But virtual, depending what country they're in, they might be like, oh my gosh, that's like 4 times the minimum wage over here. Like, yes, I will do that. So there's different budgets, and also it depends how much of an expert you need in a certain field, how much you're going to pay. Entry level, obviously, here or elsewhere, they're going to charge you less than if you need the head of the marketing department for your, for your company, right? So it's like there's a levels to everything. So definitely worth investigating, but next up, we're going to continue this conversation about virtual assistants, and we're going to dive a little bit deeper into that. But first, let's put in a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist courses.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there. So, what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold, so you don't have to waste your time going down those endless rabbit holes.
In addition to weekly calls, we have created video course modules to cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, artist mindset, PDF resources, templates, and so much more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartists.com to learn more, get immediate access, and level up your career today.
Welcome back, everyone. So up next, we want to talk about choosing a virtual assistant within your country versus hiring internationally, which really involves many factors from cost and language to time zones and cultural understandings. So with local virtual assistants, of course, there may be easier communication, more cultural alignment. You can reference local landmarks, or they may know the area well. If you say, hey, I want you to search for all of the art galleries within 30 miles of Raleigh, they already know, okay, you go to Cary, you go to Garner, you go here, you go there. They understand what you're referencing. But they may come, of course, with the higher costs. While international virtual assistants can often be more affordable, but may require more clear guidelines to either bridge the language barrier, cultural differences, or the references to the physical location that may be more off the cuff with an in-person assistant.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up the whole like the city part, because I'm like, if they're in your same city, they will also get that reference, like you said. But let's say you're in North Carolina and you hired somebody in Oregon, they're also going to get a little lost about 30 miles from the city they've never heard of. But there'll be less of like if you're talking in miles versus in other countries they talk in, kilometers, for example, like at least in terms of measurement and currencies and things like that, they're going to be on the same page as you are versus international. There's going to be a little bit of that where you're like, oh my gosh, it's so hot, it's 74 degrees, and they're like Celsius or Fahrenheit. um so that part's always funny. Speaking of those kind of differences, there's also time zone differences. So depending how far your virtual assistant lives from you, if they're international, it could be an advantage to have your task completed overnight, which is awesome. It's like you just put it in and then you wake up in the morning and the thing's done. I love that. But it can also make real-time communication challenging, again, depending where they are. So if you're Eastern US and your assistant is somewhere in South America, chances are the time zone's like a lot more similar. But for example, my VA is in the Philippines and she's 12 hours ahead half the year. And then the other half of the year, she's 13 hours ahead because of daylight savings. So we had to try different meeting times until we found one that actually works for both of us. It's like in the evening for me, in the morning for her, on a certain day of the week, and that worked out. But that's something you're going to have to navigate at first if you're dealing with working with somebody that's international. And then the other one, super duper important, is going to be legal and tax considerations. So your best bet is to ask your tax professional if there are any regulations or taxes involved in hiring internationally. depending how it's set up, at least, for my type of business, there's not much extra that I have to do, which is great. I can report, as part of my business expenses that I'm paying somebody else in another country. And that's pretty much the extent of it. But depending how many people and what are they doing and how much you're paying, ask your tax person to see if you have to file anything extra for that. And then of course the question that everybody may be asking at this point, like, okay, I am convinced. So how do I hire one? Like you've talked about the types, the training, are they here? Are they out there? How do I even, get started on this? So obviously finding the right person is going to be crucial for building a reliable and efficient team. So here's some considerations on this. The first one's going to be you have to define your needs. Like before you get started, I think Jackie mentioned this earlier, like you need to be crystal clear on what you want to delegate and what kind of skills are required. Again, it could be something that you're not an expert on, and that is okay, or something that you do so well that you could train somebody else to do it as well, right? But essentially, you need to be clear on the kind of person. It's unrealistic, and I feel like this is something that in conversations with other artists who are hiring artists for the first time, it's something that's easy to forget. There is not one person that can do everything. It just doesn't exist. So their strengths might be social media and video editing and maybe even responding to customer emails for an online one, right? But then you also need someone that's going to go in person with you and it's going to help you with like content capture, or they're doing fills. Like some people are going to have some strengths that others don't. So you may have an in-person that's great at one thing, but then they try to help you with some admin stuff and they're like, I hate this. Like, I just want to help you paint. I don't want to do anything on the computer. So something to think about. You need to be clear on the kind of person you need. And like we mentioned earlier, don't be afraid to mix and match and work with different people. The other thing is you need to search strategically. You can use platforms like LinkedIn, Fiverr, Upwork. I mean, these are great places to get started if you need a one-off person to do this one thing and you just want to get a taste of it without going through, all the training or anything like that. You just want somebody to take your logo that you created in Procreate and can you make it a vector so I can use it as the logo for my website? That's a great place to kind of get a taste for these kind of things. Or like we said in that other episode about like getting a photographer, working with a framer, working with an accountant. Those are great ways to get a taste. Also obviously ask people in your network, other artists, family and friends, etc. They may know somebody. When it came to the virtual assistant that I've been working with, I found her through a website called onlinejobs.ph, which has it allows me to directly hire someone that's in the Philippines. So I mean, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the process, but I will say, whatever website you choose, whatever country you go for, keep an eye out. Be very careful. Like look very closely to see how that platform pays them, because you may think like, oh, this thing, it's great, like, oh, I'm paying $10 and they may be taking half. Like, you don't know.
Mhm.
And the more you keep using that site, the more they take, right? And then that person is not even making a living wage. So that's something to think about. Obviously there's different sites, conversation for a different day, but definitely do your research and see what are they actually making? Like how much is that platform or thing you're doing taking versus like, for example, like we mentioned, the one that I use to find mine, it's a direct hire. I pay for access, but once I hired my person, they're completely out of the picture. Nobody else takes a cut. What I pay her, she gets all of it, other than, minor processing fees. But that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And that's definitely something to think about because you definitely pay for convenience as with everything in the world. So sometimes if people make it super, super easy, then they get a cut of it. So it's something to be always looking out for. So you at least know what you're paying for and who's getting what money. But once you do either use a platform or get a referral from another person, you of course need to see if this assistant is a right fit for you. So you'll be conducting interviews with them. And this is obviously up to each artist and business owner on how they want to conduct interviews, how many interviews they want to do. But we just want to mention the element of making sure that you're very careful and strategic with your interviews, because of course there may be a time when you interview someone, they think they're great, and then you find out later on that it's not a right fit. That's bound to happen at some point as an employer. But you really can learn a lot through the interview process of assessing the candidate's experience, understanding their communication skills and style, and really figuring out that compatibility with your work style as well. So making note of all of those things, yes, it can be super easy and super tempting to take the first person that you kind of came across and be like, wow, look, they're great. Let's hire them tomorrow, get them rolling, without really talking to them, really vetting them, seeing if the work that you are wanting them to do is really in line with what they want to be doing. So making sure that you take the interview process very seriously, which may also include a trial period in the beginning. So you could offer a short-term contract or a trial period, maybe a startup project to really evaluate their performance before committing to a long-term arrangement. This might be a 2-week project, maybe a 60-day short-term contract, to where one, you as the employer can kind of work out the kinks of the communication style, the cadence to how often you meet. Maybe there's trainings that you have to develop before they're locked into a full-on contract. But it also allows for, at the end of that trial period, both of you to come to the table and say, hey, over the last 60 days, this is the work we've done. This is how both of us feel it went. And you can kind of have that built-in time to really evaluate, how did it go? Do we want to continue moving forward? All good, thumbs up. All right, let's go. And having that built-in time to reassess rather than having it after the fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you mentioned the trial period. Some folks I've talked to feel it feels like they have a little bit of resistance to someone in another country because they're like, is my information safe and things like that, which makes perfect sense. I would say be just as careful as you would be with somebody in person. You don't have to give them your account logins. You don't have to give them any kind of bank information. Like
Yeah.
payment, we both started sending payments through PayPal. Like that was so straightforward. It's not even funny. Just like I
Yeah.
would send, to a cousin in another state, I can send it to someone in another country. It's not the cheapest thing. But when you're starting out, you can go with something that's a little bit easier to handle,
Mm-hmm.
especially during that trial period. And then you can see what they're like and see if you mesh. Again, it's the same thing as someone in person. You're not going to give them your bank card. Someone that you just met, can you go to the ATM and get some money out for something to get at the hardware store? Probably not. Okay. Um, so
Right.
very careful, obviously, with both. And that trial period will really be a good way for you to realize, like, are they a good fit or not? Are they responsive? Are they ghosting? Like, I mean, there's so much you get to find out during that time, but do not be afraid to try it. That's kind of
Mhm.
where we're going with this. It's definitely worth it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point too in terms of the trial period of both with bank account information, but also with like email access to your social media accounts, really thinking of projects that you could use as a way to test their interests, test their skills. And it may require a little bit more work for you to provide them pictures from your Google Photos rather than them having a login to your Google account. But
Mhm.
yeah, always making sure that you're thinking of that protective element. And then as you guys build that relationship, as you build trust, allowing them to have access as it's needed and with security parameters, of course. So, but ultimately, building a team and delegating tasks can feel like a really big step. It is as a business owner for sure, but it is essential for growing your art business and giving you more time to focus on your creative work, and can be a great solution that may feel intimidating, but can be super helpful for many artists.
Absolutely. And by understanding like the different kinds of assistance, getting into the training, making those strategic hiring decisions, you can definitely build a strong team that can support your artist goals. You don't have to do it alone. You can build a team. First step, like we said, just think about those tasks that you would really, really, really love for somebody else to help help you with, whether they take it on all the way or they're just helping with parts of it. And I think they'll get the ideas going on the type of assistant, kind of like what we discussed today, that could help you achieve some of those goals. So with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes, where you'll find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at May Art across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we're at Level Up Artists on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.